everyone. Thank you for coming along today. We're just going to make a start, I guess. So, I've been told to stand in front of the lectern. I'll give it a try. So today's the International Day of People with Disabilities. This is a UN-sanctioned day that's celebrated every year on the 3rd of December. So the day aims to promote public awareness, understanding and acceptance of people with disabilities. So today's not like the other special days like Mother's Day, Father's Day, Grandparents' Day, you know, where people express their gratitude, for our existence with special cards, gifts and acts of love. So is it Shift F7 or just F7 or F5 to go? That one? Got it, okay. Okay, so celebrating the achievements of people with disabilities is just a little complicated. And that's because disability has an image problem. So I've got a meme here you've probably all seen before. The only disability in life is a bad attitude. So, you know, if we think about the other day, like Mother's Day, we don't say, thanks Mum for being a great mum in spite of being a mother. You know, so people with disabilities are celebrated for achieving things in spite of having a disability. So these images we really see, they're designed to make non-disabled people feel better about their lives. So if Scott Hamilton can climb Everest while having cancer, if Oscar Pistorius can compete in the Olympics despite being an amputee, if this cute little girl, you know, can, etc., etc., etc. You see where I'm going with this. Surely I can feel okay about my own less than ideal life. But, you know, it's not really true, is it? That the only disability in life is bad attitude. What about all the obstacles that are put in place that disable people? The stairs that prevent wheelchair users from getting where they want to go, the images without alternative text preventing blind people from navigating the web, and Stella Young, a disability advocate who made a critique of this in her TEDx talk on inspiration porn, and in it she says that, quote, the only disability in life is a bad attitude. The reason that's bullshit is no amount of smiling at a flight of stairs has ever made it turn into a ramp, and no amount of standing in the middle of a bookshelf and radiating a positive attitude is going to turn all those books into Braille. So what Stella's getting at here is the fact that disability is really related to the environment and the way the environment is created in ways that favour certain types of bodies and disable others. And, you know, environments can be changed, and especially digital environments. This is something that Mike and I wrote about 10 years ago now in our book, Disability and New Media. So in that book we were arguing that when something's digital, we really should be able to choose the way that we access it, the way that information is displayed and communicated, whether we wanted that in audio, in text or via a Braille tablet. By digitising something, you really should be able to pick the output that suits you too. But something we also found in our research and continue to talk about endlessly is that the digital world's created in the same social environment as the analogue world. So decisions are made to make things accessible to certain types of bodies and not others. And we saw that this year, didn't we? So for years, people with disabilities have been asking for remote, flexible, digital work environments, study environments to be able to access, you know, places like museums, the cinema from home. And, you know, people with disabilities were told it just wasn't possible. But then, you know, it just took a little pandemic for the whole world to change, and we could see that suddenly this did become possible just overnight. So, and for a lot of the people with disabilities that we work with and have spoken to in this time, it was a really bittersweet year for this group because, you know, suddenly they had access to remote work, study, cultural life in an accessible way. They were able to, you know, create their environments in the ways that suited them. And contactless delivery was also another thing that the disability community really celebrated this year and that we all appreciated. So I want to take you back to an innocent time before the pandemic, or just at the beginning, back in March. You know, we had no idea what was going to happen, and with the whole COVID-19 situation, and we were still thinking a lot about the bushfires and the trauma of that. Mike, Catherine, Leanne and I, later Gwyneth came on, we were wrapping up our project called Navigating Urban Spaces with a survey of Vision Australia clients regarding their use of smartphones. So when Mike and I pitched the project to the ARC back in 2015, we were very innocent then, but we were really fascinated by the fact that smartphones, as far as we could tell, were very much like a piece of assistive technology that everyone, regardless of their disability, used and carried around with them in their pockets wherever they went, and personalised their smartphones to their exact needs and requirements. So the project was looking at how people use their smartphones to navigate urban spaces, and we're really keen to finish the project with the blind community because they have been so supportive of the work throughout the whole 3 years of the project, and were very active in talking about their use of smartphones. And also because of our work on audio description, but also because Vision Australia had contacted us because they wanted to update a survey that they had done back in 2015. So in 2015, they found that only 17% of their clients with blindness or low vision used smartphones. And when we conducted our survey back in March, we discovered a 365% increase on this figure, and an anticipation amongst the people that we spoke to that we were on the cusp that things were about to change as this pandemic developed, and that their phones might become a more important part of their lives, and that they were also a little bit concerned that this would be quite expensive for them. So for all of us, the environment was changing, and it was an exciting moment for us and the disability research team to capture as social model disability researchers. So the International Day of People with Disabilities theme this year is Build Back Better. And so the theme is really focusing on looking to a more accessible, universally designed post-COVID world. And I have noticed a difference in the way the International Day of People with Disabilities has been celebrated this year. I heard a lot of people on the radio this morning talking about their experiences of COVID and their other experiences of life hacking and using accessible technologies to change their environments before and during COVID. So I'm a bit excited about the theme this year and the different focus on people with disabilities achievements, and a recognition that people with disabilities have a skill and knowledge in terms of living their lives that we've all learnt from during COVID-19. So I've got some audio from Vision Australia's Manager of Government Relations and Advocacy who wanted to introduce the research project, Chris Edwards, before Mike then will talk to us about it in person. So I've just got audio from Chris. I have to find it again. Hopefully we can all hear it.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Edwards. I'm the Manager of Government Relations and Advocacy for Vision Australia. Back in 2009, when the iPhone 3GS was first released, it was a liberating experience for people who are blind and low vision, like myself. It was the first time that you could purchase a device that works straight out of the box with all the accessibility features built in. Today, 11 years later, most of the smartphone suppliers also have these features built in as a matter of course. What makes iPhone so liberating for people with blind and low vision, the features within it really do enhance the independence and access to community. Whether it's an app that helps navigate something, helps you read something, or even just using mainstream apps with built-in accessibility to do banking and shopping really does help people with blind and low vision remain independent. Vision Australia strongly believes that when we advocate to government, to industry, to the community and the sector, that we need to have a strong evidence base to support our advocacy. And whilst we had anecdotal evidence through our work with people with blind and low vision that smartphone usage was on the increase, this report really does give us the evidence that we require to do strong advocacy. We've been delighted and privileged to work with Katie and her expert team at Curtin. The report that we are launching today is a testimony to the thoroughness of the research, the analysis and the recommendations that will help us move forward. As we move forward into a COVID normal, it's really important that blind people across Australia and their needs are considered and addressed. One of the things is to make sure that smartphone apps that provide us with information are accessible and are usable to all the community, including people blind and low vision. And that, that these phones are fit for purpose to really help and enable us to live independently. This research does show that we've still got some way to go to ensure that we've got consistent, accessible information that is through our smartphone. But we are confident that this research will provide us with the recommendations to help move the goal forward to ensure that we do have a more accessible environment into the future. So again, thank you to Katie and her team, and well done. Over to you.
Okay, so while Mike comes up to tell us all about the report and the research, I want to say thanks to Catherine, Mike, Leanne and Gwyneth for doing this project, and your expert research and analysis has been really great. I think we found some interesting things.
We did.
We did.
Thanks very much, Katie. As we go into the more formal launch of the report, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the land of the Whadjuk Noongar people and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. What I'm going to do for people who are listening at home and everyone who's here, I'm just going to go through some of the highlights of the report and some of the interesting findings we made. But I think what Vision Australia was saying is quite true. This really was quite a landmark study in what we was able to sort of show what we sort of had the feeling was going on. But it's really important that these technologies are being used by the blind and low vision community, and that there are still gaps in the accessibility. It's interesting when we're talking about the 2009 launch of the iPhone 3GS, it was the 2008 launch of the iPhone that first got me interested in disability and technology, because it was so hopeless at actually being used as anything other than like a substitute for a mirror, because none of the accessibility features worked. So it was lovely that Apple turned it around very quickly, but it was actually that initial failure, I suppose, that started me in this whole field of study. So I should probably thank them for that as well. So just a little bit of background. This, as Katie was saying, this project came at the end of an ARC-funded project, Navigating Urban Spaces, which relied on an app that I thought was going to be this fantastic sort of research tool, which was actually a bit of a disaster. We discovered that people don't like downloading apps onto their phones that spy on them, particularly if you say this is an app that's kind of spying on you. We worded it slightly better than that. And I'd like to thank, Cambridge Analytica and a number of other companies who helped set that stage for us. This survey was conducted, as Katie said, in February and March. I might actually go back to the slideshow, sorry about that. 2020, and then I suppose the interesting third aspect or third act to it that we didn't expect was that we were then able to conduct follow-up interviews during the pandemic. So, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. The report was in 3 parts. There's an initial background section for those. I know everyone listening is going to race off and download it as soon as I finished, and it provides some important context in the sort of studies that have gone before. And I suppose the key message to take out of that is lots of people have done really interesting research, but they tend to be focused on smaller sample sizes. So people are very interested in how people with disabilities use technology, but traditionally what we do is we get half a dozen people in a room and ask them how they use technology, which is great and really useful, but this more sort of quantitative study I think was really useful. We then talk about the survey results and the interviews. The key findings of the report, I'm sort of giving these to you at the start in case you're not off as I talk a bit longer. There was, as we highlighted earlier, 79% of the blind community use a smartphone. This is up from 17% in 2015. So in less than 5 years, the growth has been the adoption, I suppose, has been quite phenomenal. We found that while age is still plays a role, the gap between as people get older and their use of smartphones has been decreasing. I mean, as you would expect with this massive uptake, but it's only really significant now for people who are over 75. It also plays an important role in the breadth of use. So as people get older, they tend to use the smart less and the phone more, and I think that's important as we see, and I'll go and show you later on some of the different accessibility apps people are using, which people, I suppose, who aren't using them are excluded from. Accessibility apps are used by 50% of participants. When I give these talks, I have a tendency to race ahead into the next slide before I've changed it, and I'd just like to apologise for that in advance. They were used by 50% of participants, but many were unaware of the apps and their capabilities. And those that don't use accessibility apps still face a range of issues, limitations and lack of accessibility. Everyone loves voice assistants. We've discovered that's everyone's favourite accessibility app. It's quite nice because that dovetails into another bit of my research, which is all about voice assistants, so that's really nice. And this was the most popular accessibility feature. Oops. So what we did, we initially, after our background section, which I talked about briefly, we conducted a survey. This was in conjunction with Vision Australia using their client register. So we had access to all the members of Vision Australia who were happy to talk to us. We put together a 24-question survey, which you can see in great detail in the report itself, but you'll be glad to know I'm not going to go through every single question today. We had 845 respondents, which was quite a significant number for this sort of report. It means looking, and this is fudging statistics, so forgive me, but if you sort of squint a little bit and look at the broader population in Australia of people who are blind and with low vision, it gave us about a 3% error rate on the responses we got, which is quite significant. And the findings are, there's nothing where we go, oh, 3%, is this yes or no? It's all quite straightforward. The survey was conducted using phones and an online survey. We had some interesting adventures with online accessibility through the survey technology. The initial survey design was coming back with constant repeats, and that was with Qualtrics, if you're listening, who we contacted and said, this is a problem, and they said, thank you. So that was a bit of a disappointing response. But while it would have been nice if they tried to fix it, the problem was everyone trying to be too accessible. So the web browsers are desperately trying to read all the alternative text. Qualtrics is putting in both of the major types of alternative text, and it's like going back to the accessibility when everyone had a little, shadow behind the pictures to make everything look 3D, and then they would then have alt text, oh, this is a shadow behind a picture. Nice idea, but it also reduces the accessibility by trying to be accessible. 79% of the 79 participants that owned a smartphone, 74% used an iPhone, which is consistent with the other research we've been doing in Australia, which shows that the disability community in general seems to prefer iPhones, but that's not necessarily mapped to the globe. 26 used an Android, and of these, Samsung was the most popular. 84% of people said they use their smartphones throughout the day. Here is a slide where I'm showing how this breaks down by age, showing that 100% of 18 to 24-year-olds that we surveyed used it. It declines to 98 in the 25 to 34-year-old, 92 in the 35 to 44, back up to 94 in the 45 to 54-year-olds. I assume that's because of the age bracket I'm in. And then declines from there, 91% of 55 to 64, 78 of 65 to 74, 57 of 75 to 84, and 31% of 85 plus. The Vision Australia client base tends to skew a little bit older than the general population, which is why the age breakdown works like that. People use their smartphones for all kinds of things. Not surprisingly, a whole lot of people use them for making and receiving phone calls. Interestingly, not everyone. I think that may just be a statistical blip. That might be part of our 3%. Then text messages, emails, accessing Vision Australia services, banking, booking taxis and ride sharing, public transport information, then browsing the web, getting around in the community, which was nice because that was what our whole research project was about, getting around in the community, listening to radio or podcasts, online shopping. Not as many people playing games, only 13.8%. Similarly, ordering takeaway or home delivery, 17.8%. I imagine some of that gets subsumed in actually using the phone as a telephone. Social media, I was surprised, was only 44% use. Watching movies or television, 20%. Reading ebooks, 25%. Checking the weather, 53%, and other, 25%. So stuff that we didn't think of. The age of participants, as I said in the key findings, really affected the breadth of use. There was a significant reduction in the amount of people over 65 using the smartphones beyond phone calls. So 33% use it for emails, 24 are accessing the web, 17 for social media. So these numbers are significantly different from that table we just saw. So a reduction of over 25% in each category compared to people under 65. When we asked people about the assistive features they used in their smartphones, we found, as I said in the key findings, 65% used the, this is the not Siri stats. So people use VoiceOver in the screen reader, that's 65%. That was the innovation that came in with the iPhone 3GS back in 2009. Text resizing, zoom magnification, contrast, colour and brightness adjustment. 18% used audio description, 4% used braille screen input, and 12% used other. As an aside, I had an interesting briefing with Apple the other day where they're trialling new technology where you point your phone at things and it tells you what it is. And there was this quite startling example where someone went into their backyard and pointed their phone at their dog and it said, "Dog sitting on green grass," which was quite an amazing thing. So I suppose not really related to the launch of this particular study, but there are really interesting things that this technology is bringing to, particularly to the blind and low vision community going forward. When we talked about voice assistants, and as you can imagine, this is a lot about talking about Siri, given the popularity of the iPhone. People used it for getting telephone numbers, getting access to the weather, general questions, turning settings off and on, alarms, spelling help. Oh, I never thought of that. And only 20% of people didn't use a digital assistant. The apps that people used, were Google Maps was very popular, as was Blind Square, Guide Dog, Soundscape, Move It, so ARIA, so lots of apps, again, I suppose, that are really focused on moving around in an urban environment or moving around, I suppose, in buildings and things as well. Apple Maps, Trip View, more maps. 26% of people didn't use apps at all. Interestingly, for Vision Australia, they were the largest source of apps for people to use, 53% getting their app advice from service providers like them, then down to 30% friends and family, other people who are blind or who have low vision, 25% internet search. I know that I seem like I'm reading lots of these, but I'm assuming lots of the people listening can't actually see what I'm talking about, so for those of you who can, this is why we're going through these numbers. 20% online discussion forums and newsletters and 14% other. Of the people who didn't use smartphones, 18% stated they did not own a smartphone, 3 had one but didn't have it anymore. Most of the people, 83%, were over 65 years of age. So the survey's broad conclusions, while age still plays a role in determining uptake, the gap is shrinking. This age also plays a role in breadth of use. This is something I haven't highlighted earlier. The level of visibility of participants and the duration to which they've experienced low vision or blindness also impacted on smartphone use. And this was often a key reason that people gave for not owning a smartphone. So people who have recently developed blindness or low vision are less likely to have a smartphone. Accessibility apps were used by 50% of participants, but many were unaware of the apps and their capabilities. There were issues with the apps that people did use, limitations, lack of accessibility, that sort of thing. Siri was the most popular, or voice assistant, sorry, were the most popular accessibility feature on the phone. Others were used less. Again, the level of vision and the lack of familiarity with these features plays a significant role. So if I can move on now to talk about the follow-up interviews. As the survey was completed in March, we were starting to feel the first impact of COVID-19 here in Australia. I was making unusual choices myself about where I was going to be locked down, having a number of different places I could potentially spend the next couple of months. So that was a bit exciting. I'm sure other people had these choices as well. Now, in the report, we make mention of the fact that Australia was very lightly impacted by COVID-19, and that is true. But I think it's important that we acknowledge that there have 908 people have lost their lives due to the pandemic in Australia, and even though we say that we got off lightly and things, that's still a disaster and a tragedy. But as my phone reminded me when I was preparing this presentation, 2,760 people died in the United States yesterday of COVID-19. So we did get off lightly, even though it's obviously still impacted on us here. What the interviews found, on a more cheerful note, smartphone use increased across all but one participant. So we went back and we interviewed 11 people from the original survey to get some more detailed information. So just one, and that person didn't own a smartphone, so they didn't have a lot of opportunity to increase their use.
Please, no attention please. The building's warning system is about to be tested. These are test tones only, and no action is required. I repeat, a routine test, but no action required. Thank you.
Oh, that's so unfortunate.
We just planned this so I could catch my breath.
Emergency.
Now I'm going to continue as though that's the only thing that's going to happen. We'll just see how that goes. So overall smartphone increased, but for people who are newly blind or undergoing life changes, it had a significant impact on the way that they use their phones. For these people, different functions, apps, and combination of online, offline strategies were employed. So they changed. For them, it wasn't just I'm using the phone the way I've always used it, but a bit more. It was a really significant game changer for the way people use their phones. For others, people use their phones more for leisure activities, such as reading, watching television or videos. There was also an increase, and I'm sure speaking to a lot of people here in the university, there'll be a fair bit of understanding of this. There was an increase in the use of communication apps and features, such as Zoom, social media, messaging apps, Skype, Teams, being used in a more professional context, and particularly people working from home. People noted that learning how to use these apps was not necessarily easy, and I'm going to name names here, Zoom. But at the same time, people indicated that it was, once they had used them, these were things they were going to continue to use. So once you'd gone to all the effort of working it out, they felt that it was worth it. Half the people thought that this would lead to a cultural shift and continue beyond the alleviation of social distancing. Now, I've said here in my slide, for those of you who can see it, that it would be an illicit cultural shift, but I don't think that's the word that I meant to use. I feel I've been auto-corrected, and I'd like to apologise. Yes, I think that's probably what we were after. It would elicit, not illicit. I should have used Siri to check the spelling. So smartphones are also used creatively to work around restrictions brought on by COVID-19. So the examples I've got here from two participants, this one person's support worker would come and video the walks with her guide dog, and I would send the video. So training a new guide dog, someone would video the walks they were taking and then send those videos to the guide dog trainer, and then call to discuss how things was going, because they couldn't obviously meet with their guide dog trainer. Someone else took a photo of their disability card so that they could send that to their support worker, who could then get through, I doubt it was police roadblocks, but if someone stopped them, that would allow them to meet them to take them for walks as well. The COVIDSafe app, which I note as I'm talking has recently been relaunched to limited fanfare. Most participants expressed some scepticism about the app, both its effectiveness and the way their privacy or data would be used. Several participants did not believe it was relevant to them, as they lived in a rural, remote community, did not travel or did not use public facilities often. And another important group said the app wasn't accessible for them. And some of these people felt it wasn't accessible when they had to call a sighted relative to come and help download the app, and they still couldn't get it working. I'll just go quickly through our recommendations. For government, we recommend that smartphones should be recognised by the National Disability Insurance Scheme as a valid accessibility device. Often the NDIS has devices that are mainstream, but at the same time accessibility devices, and the smartphone's such a classic example of that, and that makes it hard for people to get access to it, despite the fact that this should be a service that the NDIS is focusing on. It'd be even better if all the apps were accessible, but baby steps at least. The contact tracing app is, if people aren't using it, and this is a vulnerable group of people with disabilities, then it's really not fit for purpose, and they probably should have had a bit of a harder think about that. Just because this is the 1 in 100 year pandemic that we've been expecting for the last 100 years, it does not in any way indicate that we won't have another pandemic, particularly given we expected it to be some sort of avian flu and it wasn't. If this sort of public policy response is required again in future, it really needs to be something that's fit for purpose, particularly if they're going to waste time telling everyone to download it when it's not actually doing its job. For smartphone designers and app developers, they need to be aware I mean, at the most basic, the blind and low vision community are smartphone users. This project also highlighted how important cross-platform compatibility is, capacity to be read by a screensaver, by a screen reader across browsers by different users. And I might also add that that's perhaps something that the community that develops online surveys could well pay attention to as well, because that seemed to be a problem. And also, we recommend employing apps or accessibility policies. I know that they already exist, but they have a very technical focus, a bit like the screen reader being able to read the shadows behind the pictures in 90s websites. Actual usability rather than technical usability needs to be more of a focus. Industry, there did seem to be a lack of knowledge, particularly around accessibility apps, that could really be worked on, particularly if you're a designer of accessibility apps. The other thing that came across very clearly was that people don't really want a whole suite of new apps or different apps. They just want the ones that there are to work. So compatibility, usability and reliability need to be a real focus of app developers. It's also important to remember that the blind and low vision community are avid consumers of media, including online videos and television, and these need to be taken into account when producing those to make sure that they're accessible, particularly in a smartphone format, which often circumvents other regulations designed to make these things more accessible. For service providers and the blind and low vision community, Vision Australia play a crucial role, or Vision Australia and similar service providers play a crucial role in the way people with low vision or blindness use their smartphone. Respondents generally spoke very positively about them, which I think was great. I mean, we were calling people who were on their mailing list, so there might be a bit of a skew in the data there. But for their clients, they were generally very happy. There were significant numbers who 37% wanted more education and training, and similarly 37% wanted more information on smartphones. Across all sectors, the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic is an opportunity to consider how a health emergency or any large emergency exacerbates digital inequalities. As online shopping, telehealth, video, audio conferencing apps become normalised during the post-pandemic, usability, compatibility, information on and training in these services should be proactive rather than reactive. It's a bit late once we're all locked in our houses for people to gather and to get training for that time when we might all be locked in our houses. It's important that access to smartphones and other similar devices and associated technologies by all people, and particularly those with blindness or low vision, are monitored and enabled. And finally, we recommend that the responsibility for accessibility is embraced and shared across all sectors, recognising that access is not simply established through device design, but achieved through responsive industry, service provider and government policies. I have a slide here of the acknowledgements, including the Australian Research Council, Vision Australia, people who worked with us on the project, and our fantastic team of research assistants who spent a lot of time in a windowless room in Building 208 on the phone, calling people to get this data, and I appreciate that would have been weird for them, and they did a fantastic job. And there's actually a section in the report that specifically goes back to highlight things that they found that weren't actually in the survey questions. So it's always great when you've got people who are doing surveys who are able to tell you sort of the workaround. Well, you asked this question, but actually we've got the answer to this other question. And that, I won't go into details now, but that's something we've highlighted in the report. And also, obviously, we'd like to thank the 845 people who either online or on the phone did answer our questions. I think a lot of them missed the memo that said we were going to be calling, and they were very generous, given that meant we were cold calling them, to actually give us the information. And finally, I'd like to thank my co-researchers and authors of the report. They did a fantastic job, and I think this is a really substantial bit of research, so I'm really happy and proud to be launching it today. Thank you all very much.